Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Frontline Advantage. Today we have Justin Reinhardt. Justin is an author, coach, talent leader, and inquisitive human. He's going to talk to us today about all things that interest him, including his work as the VP of Partnerships at BrainAware Training and his work as a principal and founder at Performance Accelerated Learning. Welcome, Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I'd like to get a better understanding of where you want to begin. I'll tell you where I'm interested in starting. So for those of you who don't know, we talked about Justin being an author. He has a book called Creating Belonging. And Justin, as we've seen in the news with recent events, with SHRM's recent announcement of many people talk about DEI, DEI and B. SHRM had been talking about IE and D, and now moving to IND. And I want to get your reactions about SHRM's announcement and overall holistically the DEI movement and how we should be referencing it and the benefits of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think to start, it's disappointing that SHRM has made the decision they've made regarding their strategy in the realm of, for lack of better terms, DEIB. There's several letters we like to throw in there and arrange them in different ways. And I do believe that equity is an important piece of that. And, I think it comes down to definitions and perspectives, and what people want to focus on is more important. But I think with belonging, at the end of the day, we as humans are wired to connect and belong with each other. We're stronger when we're a part of a community. And so we have that need for belonging. And so in my book, titled Creating Belonging, I talk about how belonging is created at the intersection of authenticity and acceptance. So authenticity meaning I can show up with who I am without fear of judgment. And then acceptance being that, I accept others acknowledging that they deserve as much space as I do as a human being, that I don't need to approve them. And I don't need to understand them in order to accept that they belong in this community. And so, we can definitely go deeper in there. But in the work, I actually don't talk a lot about equity. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about, while I think it's disappointing that SHRM has made the decision that they made, really thinking about it in the context of the work that I do and thinking about belonging, and how does equity fit in there. And so, I have a preference for extroversion. And so, I think out loud. So let's do some thinking out loud about it today, about the equity thing. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, the removal of equity from their strategy.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in all this. I think people like yourself and others we deal with are definitely more intelligent on dealing with this matter. I am generally open and accepting and appreciate different backgrounds and perspectives people bring to the table to collectively as a whole make an organization and team thrive. And it's better to have those discussions, say, before launching a product, especially that may affect people from all different types of backgrounds and interests. So this idea of inclusion and everyone having a voice is something that Team Force itself stands for, and something I'm open and receptive to. I wonder, this idea of being able to be authentic and acceptance. And at the same time, SHRM has been doing posts around civility and what we've been seeing in the media and the news around the country, this polarizing type environment. When we think about the workplace, there are schools of thoughts around being able to be yourself, to be authentic, to belong, to be included. There's also schools of thought that in society as a whole, the workplace is focused on traditional stakeholders and business outcomes, and that needs to be what happens at work. Is this movement with SHRM putting equity under inclusion, while still saying it's important, a reaction to what may be happening more broadly with backlash around DE&I efforts? And why are we seeing that? Why are we seeing the need to make these changes in the acronyms? Is it a lack of understanding? Is it people feeling like they're being marginalized by companies focusing on these efforts? How can we collectively make this a success for everyone in society? And I think you're alluding to some of it with belonging, the importance of authenticity and acceptance. But has some of that
Mhm.
gotten us, this idea of being authentic and bringing one's whole self to work, gotten this backlash in the first place? Where does it stem from?
Well, I think if you peel back the layers of, why do we need equity? You start to then get into ideas of structural oppression. We need equity because there is structured oppression in our workplaces today. And historically, it's been there. I'm surprised that I haven't seen this posted on LinkedIn yet. I'm, following all of the discourse on LinkedIn about this decision. And there's an image that I always like to use when talking about equity versus equality, because I think that there's a desire. What I think I'm hearing between the lines is this desire to move towards equality instead of equity. And the issue there is, there's this one image that I think of, and there are three people who are trying to watch a game of something over a fence, right? And all three people are of different height. And so there's the equality version where they all get a box that's 1 foot tall. And so one person can see well over the fence because it lifts them up definitely high enough. There's one person that actually didn't even need the box. And then there's one person who is shorter and still can't see, but they have the same size box. That's equality, giving everyone the same thing. Equity is more about giving people what they need. So giving them the box that helps them see over the fence. Maybe they don't need a box. So don't give them a box. And that's okay because it's not necessary. But one person might need a taller box to see over the fence. And equity, I think, is important in organizations so that we're giving people what they need to be successful. Anytime that I've worked in organizations, I've had to focus on equity. And for me, being primarily in corporate learning, when I think about equity and what does equity mean in learning scenarios, it is meeting people where they're at and giving them the learning in a way that they need it. So I've worked in global organizations often, and so that meant finding solutions potentially in someone's native language so that they can access the training in the best way possible, that they can understand it. Being able to offer, if it's absolutely impossible for someone to come physically in person to a class, that we are offering that class as a virtual option, right? Finding ways to meet people where they're at and giving them what they need to be successful so that they get equal access, right? Equal access to opportunity. And that's what equality is about. And I think we just have to understand the difference between those two things, that equality is not equity, and that equity is all about kind of stripping back and understanding how people are disadvantaged through different means and helping them have equal opportunity to, whatever it is.
That's great. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your work too, Justin, related to performance accelerated learning and brain aware training, the types of audiences, the demographics, the people and the companies you work with to enhance and educate around these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with performance accelerated learning. This is my business that I've had for 7 years. And I do executive coaching. I do training. One particular program we offer is around creating belonging based on the book, Creating Belonging. And so, with that training offering, we're going into organizations and helping people really understand that balance of authenticity and acceptance, and that these types of things, the DEIB work has to start with the self. So I talk a lot about how oftentimes organizations approach DEIB starting with others and how we need to think about others. And I think there's a fundamental issue with that, in that we as humans are first and foremost just trying to survive. We've got to think about ourselves first. And so when we're hit with messages about how we need to treat others and how we need to look at others, but we don't see ourselves as a part of that story, we then start to opt out of it. And so I like to start with, individuals really digging into self-awareness. That's why we go into authenticity and that self-awareness, but also quickly pivoting into acceptance of others. And then understanding that not everybody's like me, and that's okay. And so that's just some of the work that I do within performance accelerated learning. And then on the brain aware training side, so this is a company that was started by Dr. Britt Andriotta. And she's authored 4 books on the brain science of success. And so in that business, I partner with our clients to help them be successful in rolling out our brain-based training solutions. So the core program is really around leadership development and helping people understand really at a biological level how we can connect with people that we work with to be more effective. And then also, we have solutions kind of across the board for individual contributors and for executives. But I partner with, people at all levels in organizations to help enable those programs being rolled out. And we work across all sorts of industries. So we're all across the board with the types of clients that we work with. I think mainly because when we think about, from the brain aware training perspective, we're dealing with people at a biological level. And so it really hits any industry.
Interesting. Yeah. Things around self. I think you and I talked about the neuroscience with things related to brain aware training. In these organizations, what is typically the conversation like related to the training? What is the pain or the problem? And I know you started with self and then being able to understand with others. And what do you kind of deliver as outcomes? And the reason I ask this beyond the industries you've described is if someone says, I want to raise my hand, I want to kind of do more in the DEI space, what is it specifically tangibly you talk to them about that they could identify with and say, I'd want to bring this into my organization?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and I'll speak kind of on the brain aware side. There have been 2 topics that they're not typically kind of squarely under DEIB, but we talk about them as if you get this stuff right, your DEIB initiatives should be working well. And the 2 concepts are around psychological safety and emotional intelligence. So if we think about psychological safety, it is, that I feel safe to speak out, when I see problems. I feel safe to fail in an environment, to try and potentially fail, that I'm not going to be punished for that. And so psych safety is a really big component of enabling DEIB for happening well. And then the second is emotional intelligence. And, with emotional intelligence, we've got the self component where we go into self-awareness and self-control. But then we move over into that awareness of others. And so we're looking at things like empathy. And if we can drive up empathy, we should be able to, make positive movement in our DEIB work. If you're in an organization that's struggling to implement DEIB, or you're dealing with some of the backlash of, pulling back DEIB, I can think of one company that's been in the news, Tractor Supply, I think is the company. And, they kind of stripped everything out as a reaction to some social media, blasting that they got. But for organizations like that, if you have executives that are afraid of that DEIB perspective, then start to talk about things like emotional intelligence and psychological safety, because if you get those things right, you're still making a better place for everyone that works there.
Makes a ton of sense. We're actually doing a roundtable webinar with the Hospital Association of Southern California and Communities Lifting Communities to talk about workplace DEI, making sure, sharing best practices, talking about challenges. We've got a few large enterprise Fortune 500 companies that are going to be being involved, Boston Scientific, Walmart. We've also got UKG, and I'll be representing Team Force AI. And it'll be interesting and a great opportunity to kind of just learn what's happening within these organizations. Have you seen any changes, Justin, with the political winds and sort of, recall, maybe was it a year or two ago? So I think about a year ago, what was happening in Target, or just in general with we see in the environment now. Have you seen those changes, and have they affected your business in any way?
Yeah, so I'm definitely seeing a slowdown of interest in doing work under that DEIB umbrella. And I don't in my work of performance accelerated learning and even in brainware training, we don't necessarily categorize ourselves as DEIB providers.
Mm.
Within performance accelerated learning, I talk about how we help leaders create high performing teams where everyone belongs, because
Mm.
that's where I want to focus. I want to focus on helping people belong in the places that they're in. And so, hopefully that messaging, gets us a softer into some of these organizations that are stripping back their budget around DEIB. But I've definitely seen a lot of that budget just drying up, which is a really interesting kind of whiplash from 2020. I recall I was working in an organization mid 2020, and our executives, reached out to me and they said, Justin, we need to find a speaker. We need to find a solution, external consultants to come in and do DEIB work immediately, because everyone, after the George Floyd and all those things happened, organizations were like, we need to bring people in immediately. We have to do something. And so you could not find people who were available. It was so challenging. And, it was a great place for a lot of these providers to be able to turn down business. And they, I recall speaking with a few different providers who had the opportunity to really vet the clients they were going to work with. And, they were only choosing to work with clients that they felt were actually being genuine in wanting to do the work, as opposed to the clients who were just checking a box at the time. But I think the winds have changed considerably, and now we have a lot of providers out in the marketplace, even more than we did in 2020. But now not as much demand or interest, because it is seen as controversial, which to me, even thinking about the term inclusion seems crazy that that's controversial. But I think it's because, where that inclusion means including people that maybe we don't know a lot about, and we might be afraid of things that we don't know about. And so then we don't want to go near that. And I think that's some of what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we try to frame things more around business outcomes now and think of components like belonging and inclusion, having a voice as inputs into achieving those successful outcomes. If anything,
Hmm.
the more people can see quantitative metrics that are immediate and with a higher degree of confidence, the more likely they are to feel comfortable with new types of initiatives. And I think you're right about the general trends of what you're describing from George Floyd in 2020 to here we are in 2024. How do you kind of think about then your brand, your business with performance accelerated learning and delivering outputs around teams and the importance of belonging? Has that caused you to change your messaging or change what your overall focus is going to be going forward? Or is it sort of like the winds constantly change and we want to be an expert in what we're doing? And the long term trends are to create more inclusive cultures where everyone can belong.
Yeah, I think, I my plan is to be consistent in our approach, the things that I focus on. I think there's not a venue that I'm not outing myself, probably. And so, I talk about as a gay man, that this work has a deep purpose for me. And so, I have no interest or plan to back off of, my mission in helping people find belonging in the places that they work, the places that they live. That's a part of my deep mission that has been, with me for a long time, and no interest in backing off from that. the messaging that you hear from me is probably a little bit different than other people in the space because I do try to make it a little more approachable for anyone and everyone. We look at in my book, I reference, just some of the research behind the effectiveness of different DEIB interventions. And, a little sidestep here. I think this is probably why we see companies backing off is we also see research that for all the investment, there's actually not a lot of progress being made. And so, I think people see it as a waste of money, but I think
Can you
there
talk a
could be
little bit
money
more
spent.
about that? Yeah, talk about so this money's
Yeah.
being spent. Yeah, let's pull that thread a bit.
Yeah. So I think and I'm struggling now to think about a reference off the top of my head, but I think when you look at several different initiatives and the kind of tracking their effectiveness, they've just been found to be ineffective. So in the research, when talking about different approaches to DEIB in organizations, historically there have been two approaches. There's the older approach, which I think a lot of people are trying to bring back, and that's the colorblind approach, right? Where everybody's the same. We're just going to treat everyone as equal. And the challenge there is that we actually don't make progress because majority narratives stay in place. Marginalized individuals are just expected to conform because everybody's the same, even though we know that everybody's not the same. And so that approach, ineffective. The second approach, which is much more, prevalent today, is the multicultural approach, where difference is celebrated. And it's also been found to be ineffective. It's not just me writing about this. There's someone who's a much more famous author than I am today, and that's Lily Zhang. And she has her first book was DEI Deconstructed. And then her second book, I think, is kind of a practical workbook, DEI Reconstructed. And she cited some of the same research that I was citing, that multicultural approach doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because that focus on appreciating difference and celebrating those who are different turns off non-marginalized people. Now, look, I'm not one to be concerned about, offending someone who's non-marginalized. The problem is that for most organizations, that's who's running the show. And so for them to feel not included in, and I think that's what we're hearing right now, right? Is like, I don't like this. I'm not included in this solution. And so that's some of this backlash to the multicultural approach is that non-marginalized individuals don't feel like they're a part of the equation. And so that's where some of my messaging starts to shift a little bit is I'm not trying to whitewash things and I'm not trying to do a colorblind approach. But what I'm saying is that we have to make sure that everyone's included in the conversation. And that's why I start with the self. When we talk about diversity, we go to things like race, gender, the obvious things, but there are lots of other pieces that make us different. Some that can be seen and some that can't be seen. And so really identifying those and then appreciating that everyone else has something that's different about them and being able to move into that place of acceptance. But we have to find that place where everyone, including the leaders of organizations that we need to help shift, feel like they're a part of the story and feel like they're a part of the conversation that, I'm not trying to replace you, but you also need to bring more people to the table. And those people need to have different identities.
It's really well said. And it's something we run into too, where people are not used to providing a voice to those that are marginalized, or they're dismissive of the mechanisms and tools we might be providing, saying, we have an open door policy, we have an annual survey, that all suffices, right? And it's like, well, and then for the person who's maybe non-marginalized traditionally, say the person within the org in a very powerful position, when they start to get feedback by people feeling more included, they start to say, wait a minute, these aren't all positive comments about me. And I have an image of myself that says I'm amazing because I've risen to this high level position within the org. And so the information and the tools you're presenting are counter to that. And my first reaction is to be dismissive of that and to immediately exclude providing that opportunity and to get everyone back to the way things used to be. That's something that I think we run into at times. And it causes us to say, should we be focusing on those organizations and those people who aren't ready for our system? Even if there looks like there's a giant need in their organization, a giant gap, but to instead focus on people and organizations that are already down this road where they say it matters and it's important, but they're not sure entirely of how to optimize and enhance. That's sort of the path we've found. And it sounds like there may be some similarities with what you're finding as well. Like find the people who care and want to create the right changes and utilize that investment and budget properly, not just the people who want to optically look like they care about this initiative and sort of are just in as a fair weather fan kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. There's so many things that I wanted to like drop in that you, from what you mentioned. So I'm gonna grab two that I think are most interesting. One is when I talk about bias and how we approach bias. So you had mentioned that when someone's getting this feedback and it doesn't match with their vision of themselves, then they dismiss it, right? And something similar happens, I think, when we talk about bias and understanding our own biases. And, I can think 15, 20 years ago doing workshops, and back then we just called it diversity. It was just, we didn't have all the EI, the B, it was just diversity. And there was this narrative that bias is a bad thing. The bias, unconscious bias, is a bad thing. And there's a problem when we talk about bias as being bad, because we can't see ourselves as being bad. Like, I'm not a bad person. If bias is bad, if unconscious bias is bad, well, I'm not a bad person. So I actually don't have unconscious bias. That's other people that have that. And so we have to take some of that judgment out of what bias is. You are biased. I am biased because I'm a human, period. End of story. Bias is a thing. It exists. And I have it because I'm alive, because I have a heartbeat, because I'm breathing. And some of those, where our bias lives, where it comes from, it helps keep me alive on a daily basis, that part of our brain. It helps us make quick decisions when we need to make quick decisions. It also makes quick decisions on our behalf without us really giving any conscious input that are counter to our modern lives, counterproductive to our modern lives. The second thing I was thinking of is, again, the executives that are getting feedback that is counter to their own view of themselves. On the brain aware side of the world, the work that we do, Dr. Britt Andriata, has done some research around the brain science of what goes on with executive brains, like what's happening to us as we rise the ranks of an organization. And what's most stunning in some of the research, and this isn't research that was original to her, research that she found, read, synthesized into other work. But there were some studies of, they were doing brain scans of CEOs, and they found these different markers, kind of patterns of brain activity that matched that of psychopaths. And what they found is that power rewires the brain. As we get power, we start to think differently. And one of the things that happens is that when we have power, when our brain is rewired, we decrease empathy, and we see signs of agreement where agreement does not exist. And so, that's, I think, where you also see some of this, executives taking in feedback that they think is flattering because they think they're good, and it's actually not positive feedback. So it's not even that they're seeing it as negative. They're just, seeing signs of agreement where agreement does not exist, or being flattered by information that isn't quite accurate. But then also getting that, I've seen so many times where, that's absurd. That's not how I see the world. Yeah, you're right. It's not how you see the world from the place that you sit, but it's how other people are seeing the world. And I always talk about feedback, and feedback's really about the person who's giving it, not the person receiving it. because it's
Mm.
the experience that they're having. And then you have to ask yourself, is that the experience that I want them to have? And if it's not, then you have to change something.
Those are good, especially the point around feedback and expect the person giving feedback. That's an interesting soundbite that I don't think I've ever heard. I often we hear about feedback. People often have a negative connotation with that word. We've heard feed forward, but hearing that feedback is about person giving the feedback and how you're making them feel and understanding whether you want to change that. Maybe even asking, is everyone else feeling this, or is this particular and unique to this one person? What's the
Mm-hmm.
context of your interaction with that person? Is it worth changing? So these are really good points. Is there anything else you want to share today?
I would say, I want to encourage people to check out my book, Creating Belonging. You can get it most anywhere you buy books. And if you're into podcasts and not reading as much, my podcast is the next best thing. So check out the Creating Belonging podcast. Again, available anywhere you get your podcasts. I just really appreciate the opportunity to join you today and chat about some of these fun and now controversial topics.
That is great. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Justin will be on the Frontline Advantage part of our website, as well as under the community section. Do check out his book, Creating Belonging, and do consider him if you are looking to do more with your DEI initiatives and getting that better bang on your buck with those investments, as well as for other types of performance-based learning. So thanks again, Justin, for coming on.
Thank you.